Exactly on time. Good morning. This meeting is called to order. For the record, the time is 11 a.m. on the day of, what is today? January 28th. The commission and staff are appearing from Helena, Montana in the Bollinger Room of the Montana Public Service Commission. I'm Commissioner Brad Molnar. I'm the presiding chairman for this meeting. Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Plainly, we have a quorum. For the record, the following commissioners are present: Commissioner Bukasek, Commissioner Fielder, myself, Commissioner Pinocci, and Commissioner Wellborn. Therefore, we have a full full staffing. Are there any announcements of any changes to the agenda or any expected late arrivals? Seeing no changes, and there will be no late arrivals, we're all here, and nobody has announced they must leave. The Public Service Commission welcomes any comment on any item that is on today's agenda or any matter that is within the jurisdiction of the Montana Public Service Commission. Are there any public commenters in the room? Seeing none. Are there any public commenters online? There are.
There are, yes, Commissioner. This is Jeff Pattison, Pattisson. Am I coming through okay?
Loud and clear.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you starting right on time, too. Got a big agenda myself today. Three things I told Tina that I wanted to kind of touch on. First one, I'll get right to it. I know there's probably a slug of other people that'd like to comment today, too, so I'll be timely for them as well. Senate Bill 160 from Senator Phelan dealing with decommissioning windmills and other renewable sources of energy, wind parks, whatever you want to call it, industrial parks. I think I would like to see a support from the Public Service Commission dealing with that. One of the things that kind of has my ire up a little bit is a lot of these things will go in and co-ops or transmission places will put in capacity to carry it out, and then it goes on to the ratepayers to pay for it. Case in point with Pegasus south of Malta there at the Zortman, when they pulled out, that was a huge line cost that goes to the ratepayers there. So that brings me to my second point, and you're going to talk about this, I think, at 1 o'clock, and I don't know if I'll be able to be on or not, so I thought I'd just touch on it really briefly. I've did a little study on the carbon fiber core transmission lines, and I really think that's a great idea for several reasons. One, at least 20% efficiency would save the ratepayers essentially some money on going through there. The second thing, with all the fires in California, and it's my opinion, I can't prove it, but I have, I'll bet you in time goes on, we're going to find out some of the transmission lines probably caused some of the fires there. They said it did in Maui. So that would kind of reduce that. As a farmer and rancher, my livelihood is dependent on the landscape of grass and crops. If a fire came through, no matter what amount of insurance that you think you might have or whatever, would not mitigate the devastation and loss. If I had to sell the herd, the genetics are gone for, that I've been working on for 50 years, and the ability of hay or whatever is there, it would just absolutely ruin not only myself, but anybody else that's affected by a transmission line fire or something coming through there. So there's a couple good points on that whole deal there. And I think that as you look at that through that whole process of it, you don't have to replace everything now, but everybody replaces on a rotating schedule. I've talked to several linemen and co-ops and utilities places, and they're all in favor of doing that, the same thing there. So that would be I think, a wonderful thing to talk about and try to implement something on it. The third thing that I had on my list here, and I'm trying not to talk too fast, but I understand your time concern, is there's a legislative request by a Bogner out there. It's LC 1474, and I'm sure you guys are aware of it. It deals with electing public service commissioners and the districting on it. As I read the language, and I could be wrong, and if it was, I'm sorry, but this is how I interpret it. They're going to try to make two districts that mirror the congressional district, con, congressional district one and I'll get it out here, congressional district two, and then have three appointed by a governor. Well, I'm going to say this in the most polite and respectful manner that I possibly can. We in Eastern Montana, we're so thankful for what we have for representation, but I just feel like it's going to go down, and with the governor at his whim and will, whatever political ideology that goes on there, that is going to cause a stress on Eastern Montana, especially. Now, I firmly believe this, and with all due respect, case in point, we went from rate increases with 4-1 against a rate increase, and then after the election, we came with a 1-4 against it. So it just totally flipped. And I really think that where we're at out here is getting undermined tremendously, even though we provide more of the natural resources for the state of Montana. I think tremendously now with all the other cut down on logging and mining and everything else, which I'm not in favor of that either, but be it as it may, we still have this one vast vested interest in natural resources here in Eastern Montana, which I am part of. So I wanted to at least speak my piece on that. And I think that you guys should really watch that and not only oppose it, but vehemently oppose it, because it's really going to be an antithesis of where we're going on Eastern Montana representation, to the point it would be detrimental and very hurtful. And I don't even know if we would be able to reconcile the damages done, in future generations. And if you allow me, Mr. President, one last thing. I was doing some talk, basic on MDU with their gas rate increase. Talked to some well holders there that have they sell gas to MDU. They tell me that they're about ready to shut down their wells themselves because they're getting robbed, literally robbed, by MDU. MDU takes that gas. This is what, and I can send you a testimony if you'd like on that. Takes the gas or buys the gas, steals it basically, then sells it to themselves at a higher rate. And then that's the figure that they're using, I think, to cause a cost influx or whatever on what they have on there. So I'm just saying that maybe there should be a little bit audit on how their pricing on gas comes, where it comes from, and some of the other interesting ideas on it. So with that, I know there's other people on there. I appreciate your time, and please, with all due respect, I meant no harm in what I said, but I just felt I had to call a spade, if you will, or speak the truth as I see it. So thank you very much. And if you had a question, I'd certainly answer or try to. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Mr. Patterson? Yep. You threw it up, so I get it. Okay, is there another commenter online?
Yes, Shane Eaton, Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. This is Shane Eaton, Prairie County, Prairie, Montana. I would like.
Can you spell your last name for the record, please?
Yes, sir. Eaton.
Thank you.
You bet. I would like to bring attention to the commission, Senate Bill 160. And I would like to see the commission make a motion and in support of Senate Bill 160. The commission is responsible for regulating utilities and rates. So here we have a situation coming in Eastern Montana where we're looking at literally thousands of wind turbines coming in to Prairie County, Dawson County, Macomb County, Montana, just to start. We already have 275 in Custer. Senate Bill 160 brings bonding for wind and solar facilities from year 15 of operation to day 1 of application. And that should be a concern for the Public Service Commission, because if you have a utility that is heavily vested in wind and solar development, and there is an environmental catastrophe where they are not bonded, the effect on the ratepayers could be enormous. And that's where I believe the Public Service Commission should take action and make a motion in support of Senate Bill 160. Not only that, as you guys look to regulate utilities and Montana's resources, Article 9 of the Montana Constitution, Section 2, states, all lands disturbed by the taking of natural resources shall be reclaimed. The legislature shall provide effective requirements and standards for the reclamation of lands disturbed. Public Service Commission doesn't want to be caught in a position with ratepayers having enormous rate increases because of an environmental catastrophe before bonding, during operation, or after operation. I can speak from personal experience, Mr. Chairman and the Commission, as a landowner that is leased to a wind developer, that the developer carries $1 million in liability insurance up to $5 million, or they will self-insure. So that in and of itself should be of great concern to the Public Service Commission as to the financial obligation that ratepayers might be open to in the future. One other thing to note, the developer in this part of the world, Mr. Chairman, is NextEra. And, Senate Bill 160 changes bonding to day 1 rather than year 15 of commercial operation. NextEra has offered to bond on day 1 in Macomb, Prairie, and Dawson County. So, an industry player has already moved to that part of bonding and offered to do it. So I don't think it's out of bounds at all to make it Montana statute. I do appreciate your time. I would answer any questions, but I do hope there is a motion, a second, and a vote in favor of supporting Senate Bill 160. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eaton. Is there are there further commenters online? We had 3, but only 2 have spoken. Okay. With that, I would like to thank the public commenters for their time. So we'll move on to item number 6, the approval of minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes as published?
Mr. President, I move approval of the commission minutes for the week of January 20th, 2025.
Thank you, Vice President. Is there a second to that motion?
I second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. We'll now begin the work session. Item number 1 is docket 204.11.111. Commission initiated the annual pipeline safety rule update to consider a draft notice of adoption to update the incorporation date of federal pipeline safety standards. Who will be presenting for the commission? Amanda, please state your name.
Good morning, President Molnar and commissioners. My name is Amanda Webster, and I'm a staff attorney with the Department of Public Service Regulation. Before you is a draft notice of adoption to finalize the annual pipeline safety rulemaking. This will update the incorporation date of the federal pipeline safety standards from November 2023 to November 2024. This change is necessary to allow the commission to use the most recent federal rules and remain in compliance with federal funding requirements. The commission previously voted to propose this rulemaking last November and published a proposal notice. The commission has not received any comments about this matter. Accordingly, staff recommends approving the draft notice of adoption and authorizing staff to make any non-substantive edits as required for publication in the Montana Administrative Register. I'd be happy to take any questions at this time. Thank you.
Are there any questions at this time? Saw your finger on the trigger. I thought you might have a question. Oh, okay. In which case, do we have a motion?
Mr. President, I move that the commission approve the notice of adoption and authorize staff to make any non-substantive edits as required for publication in the Montana Administrative Register regarding MAR notice number 38-5-264.
You heard the motion. Is there a second? And we have a second. Was that from who? Okay, that was from Senator Wellborn. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Item number 2, legislative update. This is commission initiated. This is where we discuss bills relevant to the PSC mission, statutory authority, administrative process, and general agency concerns. We discuss the PSC budget and recommendations and presentations, consider staff analysis and recommendations. Who is the staff in charge? The chair recognizes staffer Mr. Trevor.
Mr. President, for the record, Trevor Graff, GRAFF, External Affairs Coordinator for the Commission. Want to start, as we usually do, with a quick update on previous action over the last week. House Bill 103, the Railway Inspection Bill, had its hearing and appropriations yesterday. There are some interested in the funding mechanism and what it might look like. Appropriations voiced a bit of concern regarding the statutory appropriation and whether a statutory appropriation would be properly used in our case there. We are working with the committee to try to address those concerns. I think the thing to note is if appropriations does decide to back away from the statutory appropriation from the rail car tax, they could also propose it as an amendment to House Bill 2 in our normal budget process. It's a little early to tell where they're headed right now, but this afternoon I'm supposed to go sit down with Mr. Mercer, get him some more information, and we'll have a discussion on that front. That committee is also interested in the liability surrounding the state assuming the federal regulatory authority. We're working on answers for them, mostly just clarifying that we are not the charging entity in those cases. We are simply carrying out the federal regulation and submitting, civil penalties that rise to the level of the federal government taking care of it. The commission's 4 other bills on the legislative agenda have all passed and are all transmitted to the second house, awaiting a scheduling of a hearing. Those seem to be cruising along just fine. I might go knock on wood after this, but they seem to be doing fine. Yesterday, in a busy afternoon, we were asked to be informational on House Bill 263 after the hearing. As you might remember, that's the data center reporting bill that Commissioner Bukacek is interested in. The sponsor and the chairman of the committee asked if they could ask some questions. They're doing that. I'm supposed to talk to them this afternoon as well, and maybe try to clear up some of their questions from that hearing. From there, we can step into new bills. And I must say, Mr. Pattison and Mr. Eaton got a little bit ahead of me today. So I did provide a packet of bills on the desk. If you want to go through these, the first new bill to note is House Bill 314, introduced by Gary Perry. This is the Energy Authority bill we have talked about pre-session quite a bit. What this bill creates is a new entity called the Montana Energy Authority at the Department of Commerce. On page 2 of the bill, you will see the composition and allocation of that entity to the Commerce Department. It's a 14-member board appointed by the governor. That board includes a seat for each of the Department of Commerce, Department of Environmental Quality, Public Service Commission, and the governor's office. So the commission is at the table for this thing. I did have a conversation with the sponsor regarding this bill, and he wants everyone involved to know that this is not meant to step on any toes at any agency. It's meant to bring the agencies together in collaboration. A lot of questions have surrounded what is this thing going to do? On page 4, section 7 is their authority and power. I would note there is some interesting asks in here as far as, you know, getting agencies together to collaborate on facilitating planning, development, economic analysis, and coordination of facilities within and outside the state. The other interesting thing to note in there is a conversation about establishing energy corridors and also participating in regional transmission groups that we currently participate in, and with any FERC action that might come before that commission regarding the state. I would note that other states have similar entities. Wyoming has an energy authority. Utah has an energy organization that does a similar thing. I think particularly in my first read of this bill, the interesting or the comforting thing to note is they want us at the table for this process. Also note it's funded by a collection from the wholesale energy transaction tax, and that is a similar process to what they're considering for our railway bill. Just obviously the source is different. It's the wholesale energy transaction tax that's taking about 700,000 annually.
Mr. President, if I could stop on that point before you go on, I see that on page 4, line 11 and 12, it also says that the authority can receive funding from any entity,
Correct. Yeah.
state, federal or private.
Madam Vice President, yes. So I think key to note there is this would be also a potential clearinghouse for leveraging federal dollars in regard to energy development. And that's kind of the mechanism to get that placed in the special revenue account.
Was your question answered?
It was just on the funding point. Before you moved on, I wanted to
Sure.
make sure that we were aware there's other funding sources written in here.
As long as we're talking funding, I'll jump in real quickly. Do we have any idea what we would spend $700,000 on doing this?
Mr. President, I don't yet.
Well, the reason I ask is I know there was a big push some time ago for federal energy corridors. And to my knowledge, that whole process just stymied out. It was very difficult. So are we going to be hiring surveyors to go out and take a look? Any idea what they're going to spend this money on?
Mr. President, like I say, haven't had the hearing yet. I'm not entirely certain.
Thank you.
Are you done with this one, Trevor?
Yep.
Mr. President, I'd move that the commission just without objection have Trevor monitor this legislation for us.
Okay, we have a motion to monitor. Is there a second? I second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Unanimous.
Okay, the next bill is Senate Bill 188. This came from Senator Chris Pope. It is another iteration of the community solar discussion. This bill would create requirements for shared solar energy utilities. This would be the community solar type, not more than 5 megawatts with a generating capacity of has generating capacity of not more than 5 megawatts and not less than 50 kilowatts. These are entities that put up solar farms and allow customers to subscribe to those solar farms, and then would essentially treat those customers as net metering customers. You'll see on page 2 the requirements of a public utility. Obviously the system must be located in the service territory of the public utility, and the utility shall grant an on-bill credit in accordance with rules adopted by this commission. You can see on page 3 the metric for the net energy calculation requirements. That would essentially be the tariff for these customers. I do want to note that there is language in this bill that restricts the commission from segregating these customers from existing rate classes. So you wouldn't necessarily make an individual tariff for community solar customers. It would be an option within, I would assume, whichever customer class they're in. And then the bill gives the commission rulemaking authority to make the rules to implement this part.
Any questions for Mr. Graff? I'm sorry, Commissioner Panosi?
So what I'm curious about is if they produce more energy than is used, does the utility have to pay for that energy?
Under this language, yes, Commissioner.
That's really substantial.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any further questions? I have one. Mr. Graff, on page 2, lines 13 and 14, a public utility shall interconnect a shared solar energy facility. Does that mean that the public utility would pay the interconnection cost?
Mr. Chair, I think that is a good question for this hearing. It's kind of unclear to me in my read through whether that allocation portion is addressed. I think there's a gray area there currently.
Considering the ruling that we got on Sun, it seems to me it might be a little clearer and that the ratepayers would pay for it. With that in mind, when you say that Public Service Commission's capacity to rate base this and that, can you clarify that as to what you think this bill does?
Mr. Chair, if I understand the question correctly, what this bill does is create community solar projects as a entity that is required to be interconnected to the Northwestern system. And then rather than creating a special tariff for them, they're to be treated like a residential customer with net metering.
Thank you. I think your hesitancy to say exactly what this does is well-founded.
Mr. President,
Sir. Yes,
if I may, I would
Commissioner Fielder, please.
I'd move that we monitor this close. I think I've got concerns. Sounds like you may and others may as well, but I would recommend that we monitor this and let it go through the hearing and learn more about it as it goes through that process. But I definitely have some concerns about it.
Are there any other comments on that? Seeing none, we have a motion to monitor. I would hope that monitoring includes that we attend as informational should these same questions come up. With that in mind, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Unanimously passed.
Okay, the next bill is one of a couple today that are tangential to the PSC's charge, but outside of our purview. I just want to keep the commission updated on the MIPA implementation bills as they come through. And SB 221 is the first of those, well, the second of those to come out. The first that does more than, substantively striking the struck down portions of code in the held case.
Excuse me, Mr. President, Trevor, did we get a copy of that or are you just mentioning it?
I believe you got a copy.
Which one is it?
SB 221. Well, maybe I missed it. The long story short of a very long bill is SB 221 sets out the requirement for when a greenhouse gas assessment is required under MIPA. And it also sets out a process for DEQ to come up with guidance for state agencies as to when those greenhouse gas emissions assessments are required. Like I say, this is the first of 3 or 4 of these MIPA implementation, MIPA tweak bills. I just wanted you to be aware that it's happening. My suggestion is that the PSC is statutorily exempted from the MIPA process. So in the event that language comes around that tries to bring the commission into MIPA, there's an obvious red line there as economic regulators, and that would be the point at which I suggest we get involved. For now, I just want to keep monitoring these bills and make you all aware that this is a big discussion that is happening at the Capitol. To this point, I don't see it as an action item per se for us yet.
Seeing no discussion on that. Next.
The next is actually not introduced yet. We aren't typically doing this, but I've gotten a lot of interest from folks to brief this one and thought it would be good to get out in front of it. This is LC 1474. This is the appointment adjustment for the composition of the Public Service Commission. You'll see on page 1, as our public commenter noted, this does create 2 elected commission positions and 3 appointed positions. The 2 elected positions would be elected 1 from the West Congressional District, 1 from the East Congressional District. In addition to that change, it adjusts the term period from 4 to 6 years for both the appointed and elected commissioners. It then lays out the succession plan, if it were to pass, from an all-elected commission to this appointment scheme. And then also on page 4 of the bill, new section 5 lays out qualification standards for commissioners. I think what I'll note for you all is historically, an appointment bill has run in the last 3 sessions. The commissions at those times historically did not participate formally in the hearings. I think for information purposes, that's what I'll give you on the appointment bill.
Commissioner, I see your trigger finger is ready.
Just a note that I've also noted in here that this was not to affect any commissioner's current term. So there's language in here that says all of the elected commissioners would serve out their current terms. So it's not a sudden change. It's a transition plan to it. Not that that makes it any better, but that may be helpful for commissioners to realize that they're not, this bill is right now as drafted, not aiming to cut short any terms of any seated commissioners at this time.
Commissioner Panochi.
My constituents are very concerned about this bill, so I'd like to make a motion to have the Public Service Commission stand against this bill. If I get a second, I'll do some discussion on it. That's what I'm asking for. Thank you.
For the purposes of discussion, I will second that. It's open for discussion if anybody has anything they would like to comment.
Well, Mr. President, first of all, it's not a bill yet. It hasn't been introduced, so
Right.
that motion might be a bit premature to take action on something that hasn't been introduced yet, since it's not scheduled for hearing and has not been introduced, but that's just.
Mr. Graff, this is out of editing and all of that now, does it, or does it not have a bill number?
It doesn't have a bill number yet because it is ready for delivery to the sponsor, which I should note is Representative Larry Brewster. He hasn't picked it up or introduction yet.
So, further question of you, Commissioner Fielder's observation that it has not yet been introduced and therefore it would be not appropriate for us to even discuss it yet. Here we are. Would it be inappropriate or appropriate for the commission to wait until it has a bill number? Or would it be proper now to comment on the LC as written?
Mr. President, I think that's the prerogative of the commission. I think for information's sake, I would tell you that the rule for introduction is once they pick it up, they have a day to try to garner co-sponsors, and then they have to introduce it or the bill is dead. So earliest you would see it would be if it were picked up today, Thursday, and it wouldn't probably be scheduled until middle of next week at the earliest, and it's likely to be later than that, but that's reading tea leaves.
Commissioner Pinochi?
The reason I think we should discuss the bill and the possibility of the bill is I believe it will become a bill. And I think the earlier we explain that what our constituents are concerned about, the better chance of the bill getting killed in maybe committee or on the floor. This bill's come before us session after session, and I believe that it's just fine to make a motion to stand against this, and I believe we will anyway. But if I can start the discussions now, that may give us a little bit more energy in preventing it to get through a committee or getting past it all. Thank you.
Are there any further questions or comments on the motion? Commissioner Fielder?
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I did read it this morning when I received a copy of it, and I think it's a terribly sloppy piece of legislation as drafted. And I do not think it would be in the best interest of the state to for the legislature to adopt this. So, I mean, I'm supportive of the motion. I was procedurally wasn't sure where we were at since this is in limbo, but if it's already been signaled for pickup, then it's, you know, it's pretty far along. So I agree with Commissioner Pinochi. It'd probably be dropped pretty soon, but you know, every session, the legislature tries to tinker with this agency, and it's unfortunate that we don't see these same legislators here actually learning about the agency and what it does. I think that this piece of legislation was drafted and introduced out of a great deal of ignorance. The way I've read it and the conflict that it has with other section of statute that aren't addressed here, I think it's just a pretty poor piece of legislation and bad public policy to take away the right of the people to elect their representatives. So I'll go ahead and support your motion, Commissioner, and note that As it's drafted right now, it doesn't affect my reelection prospects because I'm in my final term and will be terming out. So I would say that my interest is definitely not for my own position, but just the principle of taking away the right of people to vote and elect their commissioners and the very good work that this agency does under the current structure, I would defend. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. I'm sorry, Commissioner Wellborn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm not, this is the first I've seen of this document, so I'm not prepared to speak to the merits for or against it. But I would encourage, it seems like there are people from around Montana that have, that do have, you know, whether you support or not, I would just encourage people out there to if you've got an opinion on this, is to take part in the process and come to town and or get a hold of your legislators and get involved in the process that way, because I believe that it's Montanans with a personal story to tell that can help best shape policy, good or bad. And you know, for anybody listening, I would encourage you for this bill or any other bill to get involved and share with the legislature what's on your mind and what you're thinking and where you think this needs to go or not.
Commissioner Annie, would you, I'm sorry, I'm going to need water. I know I'm going to need some water. So please do.
And I think that the public commenter from Eastern Montana this morning, I think stated very well that it would be detrimental and hurtful for generations to come if we take it out of the hands of the voters. We take it completely out of the hands of the voters. And I know in past sessions, we have not, the Public Service Commission has not weighed in. We have not been involved because we don't want to give the appearance of being self-serving. And I think that we really are here to serve Montanans. And as other commissioners have stated, you know, voters from all districts have a heightened concern, and it seems like there is a burgeoning interest in the voters having impact on the different decisions that we make. So I'm adamantly opposed to this.
Any others? I guess I'll bring up the rear here. Just so that you know, in 21, a good friend of mine, a senator, carried a bill to make it all appointed. I killed that on the floor heavily, but they just keep coming back. Without going deep into the weeds on this, if this actually gets a hearing, I will try to stay out of the weeds, but I'll go a lot deeper. The fact of the matter is, last session, almost every session, there are attempts to take away the rights or to limit in some manner the rights of the people to vote for representatives at every level of government, or to nullify what those levels of government have done. This says, as written, you will no longer be able to vote for a public service commission. 3 out of 5 will be appointed, and it's just fine if the industries have the capacity to talk to the governor and recommend. 40 states do that. States that are run by elected commissioners have drastically lower rates. There's only one that's above 25 out of 50. All the rest, including Montana, are number 12 or lower. There's a reason for that. The commissioners are accountable to the people, not to the governor that appointed them and not to the industry that made the recommendation. If I were still a senator and I voted for this, I would be ashamed to go home. I move that we oppose this as fervently as is rationally possible. And not only as a commission, talk radio, our own emails list, our own Facebook pages, etc. Get the word out that there is a solid attack to put commissioners in place that will dictate energy rates and policy, not discuss it, not debate it. With that, I call for a vote. All in favor of the motion to oppose this LC or notion, as the case might be, as it becomes a newly introduced bill, say aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously.
Mr. President, if I might, I think this one might warrant a discussion of who the representative in the hearings will be. We could,
I intend to be there, and I would say any other commissioner that wants to be there, I don't think we should overwhelm. If they're only going to give a few minutes to each person on quite possibly the most important legislation to come before the legislature this session. I guess we'll work that out between ourselves. I have some experience at this nationally and internationally and locally, so I will definitely be there. But should it get scheduled for hearing, we'll get a little deeper into that as to who exactly will say what.
Mr. President, you want to serve as the point person on it? So we just know who the point is on this? So Trevor doesn't necessarily have to act as our point, or do you want to just have him continue to monitor until?
As we speak, I will be the point. And if anybody, and however, I will communicate with the other four commissioners, and all comment will be appreciated. Anything further, Mr. Graff? Okay, I have something.
Yes.
Comment.
Mr. President, there
Mr.
is another bill.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
that was it.
Okay,
on the-
as soon as he's done with that, commenter number 3 has reached out. She is online and ready. We'll return to public comment. Okay, we'll do it now. Commenter number 3, are you online and ready to give your public comment?
I'm here.
Okay, thank you. Would you state your name and spell your last name and tell us where you're from for the record, please?
Thank you. Yes, I'm Renee Pertz, R-E-N-E-E. And Pertz, P-I-R-T-Z. I am from Prairie County, Terry, Montana.
And your comments would be?
Well, I had a couple comments and kind of reiterating what was spoken before, but we are very much watching LC 1474, and I thank you very much for voting the way you did. This is a huge thing, huge whenever voting rights are taken away from the American Montana citizens, American public. So this was huge. It's kind of a disgrace that this keeps coming up. Wish you could be killed forever. So that, thank you for voting and discussing that in the way that you did. Thank you. Our representative is Mr. Panucci, and we thank him for representing Eastern Montana very, very well and bringing this to light. And our other concern, of course, is really asking for the support of Senate Bill 160 from Senator Phelan about revising the wind and solar decommissioning, bonding prior to construction, as is done on government land. The removal of these facilities and the reclamation, as your last caller mentioned, also is part of the Constitution, and that needs to be seriously taken a look at. We have, these windmills have been around, these turbines have been around for a long time. And there is a lot of problems with it. Where to put this, where to put it when it's decommissioned, who pays for it. The money seems to be in building them. The taxpayers are paying for this. They're not self-sufficient. It's the biggest print. The only green thing about these things is the money, and it's our money. We, it's the taxpayers' money. It's coming out of our billfold and being thrown at these companies, and they can't put them up fast enough. And it's covering up. It has I could go on forever, but I'm not going to go on forever of all of the problems with these things. And we have so many other abilities to create the energy that the digital mining is really needing right now. It seems that's where the big push is for this huge flux of energy that is needed. So we need to have some control on what is happening to Eastern Montana and Eastern Montana in general. So I thank you if you look at that, if that goes to the Senate floor, that you would actually testify in favor of that bill. And then the other concern is the constant rate increases that we are having, and they are not instigated by our commissioner. But you took a pause there for a minute. Everybody got in their prospective seats, and then we got hit again and again and again. We produce a lot for Montana. Eastern Montana does. I'm fourth generation Eastern Montana. This is not an easy area of this state to live in. Not quite the lifestyle of Western Montana. I would encourage everyone, I know Mr. Pinocci has visited this area, so I'd encourage everyone. It's a whole different world over here. And so constantly increasing our rates, we are watching this and scratching our heads. What is going on? And so we're investigating. MDU seems to have a few different companies. This needs to be looked at. We need an accounting. We need to see the accounting of all their companies. Because I was reading through your paper, reasonable rate of return when you're allowed a legal monopoly, which still I scratch my head about that. And low cost power to the consumer. We are not seeing that. And then you add on the taxes that we've been receiving, the increased taxes, and then the increased taxes that we'll receive with these wind turbines. It's ridiculous. And then we are having challenges fighting this also, or even having discussion against this because it is shut down from MACO. The counties are shut down from speaking. They represent supposedly every county in the state of Montana, and yet they strong arm the commissioners not to fight it because they won't even listen. We're not going to cover you. I mean, what is MACO? One of the largest lobbying associations we have, and then they're telling us what the counties can do. So we're really relying on a higher governing force. And that's where you come in. And we are watching you. The Public Service Commission is not being watched. It is. You may have been kind of an acronym we didn't pay attention to years gone by. That is hardly the case today. And so you're being watched. We respect that you're looking at these, studying these, and we would ask that you very much pay attention to what MDU is doing and any of the other monopolies that we have been cursed with. I appreciate your time very much. I appreciate you discussing and listening. And I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee Pertz. Travis?
Mr. President, Commissioners, Commissioner Pinocci asked me to take you through SB 160 today. It was not originally briefed to you because this bill pertains to the jurisdiction of the Montana Department of Environmental Quality as it concerns wind and solar bonding. Essentially what the bill does is instead of requiring bonding later in the construction process toward or later in the lifespan of a wind farm project, it requires the bonding upfront pre-construction. Another high point of this bill is it also requires DEQ to reevaluate the bond every year and make adjustments to the needs in that bond. And that's a significant change up front to the bonding process in the state. I do think we need to level set a little bit with this bill. All of this statute lives in Title 75. None of these are PSC authorities. That said, the argument has been made that these projects could cost money to ratepayers in the rate base. I think what I would point out is Northwestern and MDU actually own very little wind energy. The entities that would be subjected to this by and large are wind developers like Nextera, who are qualifying facilities, and the money that's coming through for those contracts is a QF contract paid by the utility. The utility doesn't actually own these things. So when it comes to the purview of the commission, we're kind of in a tight spot in this discussion. I think for now, I would leave it there. With, you know, this is a program administered by the Department of Environmental Quality, and, you know, our jurisdiction, not including co-ops and not including environmental regulation in really any form, kind of is the reason why we didn't put this on your radar in the first place.
Commissioner Panoche?
Thank you, Mr. President. So some concerns brought up by my constituents concerning this bill is that when our Constitution says, look, if we're going to have resources that we're going to use, whether it be wind or coal or gold or silver, and a mess has to be cleaned up, that it could wind up, it will wind up on the taxpayer shoulders. And when we are producing energy with these resources, and we have tens of thousands of wind turbines that could potentially still be installed across the state, eventually we're going to have to take them down. We're going to have to dispose of it. We're probably going to have to deal with the millions of tons of concrete and rebar. So I think Mr. Shane Eaton did a very good job at explaining, hey, if this is going to wind up on our shoulders, Panoche, we better be talking about it. And that was the whole purpose of bringing up the bill. So I'm going to make a motion to support this bill that was designed in Eastern Montana and proposed by my legislators. And if I get a second, I'll do some more discussion. But I think the concern is warranted that this could wind up somehow winding up being a burden down the road. And there are some really good points I'd like to go over that are other concerns. So thank you, Mr. President.
There's a motion to support the bill. Is there a second?
I second the motion, Mr. President.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Commissioner Fielder?
Thank you, Mr. President. A few questions about it. Trevor, why, do you know why they put on line 17 on page 1, the commission definition in here? If this is over in this is Title 75, and they've inserted the commission meaning to mean the Public Service Commission. Have you had a chance to look at that?
Madam Vice President, Commissioners, that definition has been inserted as cleanup from the prior bill. Reason being, there's a requirement in the decommissioning plan to submit the commission approved QF rates for these projects in that plan. But that's the only place in this bill where the commission is mentioned. It did warrant definition of the commission, but frankly, it does not require action from the commission. They simply have to submit essentially the rate that they're going to get for their project for
Okay.
the calculation of the bond.
Okay. Mr. President, my next question might be best fielded by our chief legal counsel or our chief regulator. I don't know which, but I've listened to the public comments today, and I think in general, the policy I don't have a problem with, but I have a question about, who pays. I mean, the standard rate making process across the United States is that these utilities incur costs for providing the service to the customers, and the cost of doing business is passed on to the customers. So yeah, it's a rate making question, really. So and Will, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, and if you can't answer today, just let us know, and maybe we could defer this a little bit until we get some answers. But there was public comment that, and I think Commissioner Pinocci also mentioned it, that, the cleanup costs can be tremendous. And so this bill is meant to address, requiring the developer, the wind developer, or the solar developer to recover or to pay for the cleanup costs. But aren't those costs passed along to the ratepayer in the form of the cost of doing business?
Mr. President, Madam Vice President, I think it depends on the nature of the resource. I think if the utility has a PPA with a wind project that covers a certain period, it's just agreed to pay a rate over the period of the contract. And at the expiration of that contract, the utility has no further obligations to the project or its costs. So I would envision that in a scenario like that, either the wind developer who is contracted with utility has factored into the price that the utility is paying some revenue to help it decommission and remediate as required under law in the future. If the project is owned by the utility itself, if it's a rate-based wind project, then the costs of decommissioning and remediating, according to the law, would be the same for the wind project as it would be for any other resource that the utility owns and has in its rate base. The customers would bear the cost for that when the time comes.
Okay, so thank you for that. So without the legislation, the cost is borne by who? Anybody?
Madam Vice President, Commissioners, the current bonding statute has you in the same spot.
Okay. So it's a matter of the timing of when the bond has to be purchased by the company and provided for by the company.
Correct.
Okay. Can anybody explain the tangible effect of that on rates, on customer rates, consumer rates? Whether that would be advantageous to the consumer or not?
Madam Vice President, I haven't looked at the bill in enough detail to be able to answer that question at this point.
Okay. Thank you. I would suggest to my peers, even though I'm attracted to the idea, that we should get some answers before we take action on supporting it or opposing it. So for now, I move a substitute motion to monitor and obtain more information.
There's a substitute motion. Is there a second on the substitute motion to monitor until more information is garnered?
I second.
We have a second. Is there any discussion? Commissioner, I see your trigger finger is ready. Did you have? We have a question has been called, or did you have a question? Okay. The question has been called. All in favor of monitoring until more information is garnered, say aye.
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 Opposed? 4-1, the motion carries.
Okay, Mr. President, Commissioners, that's all I have on the new bill front. We are a little bit light on hearings for the rest of the week, but we do have Senate Bill 188 that was mentioned today is scheduled for hearing on the 30th in room 405 at 3 p.m.
Would you remind us what Senate Bill 188 is?
That is the community solar bill.
Okay, that would be Senator Pope's bill?
Yep.
Thank you. Commissioner Bukacek?
Mr. President, before we lose Trevor, I'm currently satisfied regarding Mr. Graff being informational witness for House Bill 263. This bill was introduced early in the session and it could go forward quickly. So I ask for your indulgence for a brief statement about why at some point I will be recommending Public Service Commissioner support of this bill, just so people can be thinking about it. May I have your indulgence? I will be brief.
Consider yourself indulged.
Thank you, sir, very much. So I attended the hearing for House Bill 263 before the House Energy Committee yesterday. It's a simple bill. House Bill 263 does not address the pros and cons of data centers with AI. I called in my testimony House Bill 263 a good first step toward addressing demand concerns of data centers. It was also called by proponents a baby step, a bare minimum that AI data centers be required to report annual electricity use to the PSC and ETIC. It was also said that this bill does not go far enough. I call it a good first step in protecting Montanans because the increased demand load projected will require complex analysis of increased supply generation, transmission, and distribution. One committee member brought up the need for an interim study to address this complexity, and I thoroughly agree, but that does not preclude passage of this first good step that will give, open the conversation about this demand issue and give notice to current and potential future large data centers in Montana. Other committee members brought up important points and asked excellent questions, and I'm grateful Trevor is going to be talking to them today. And it was also called a common sense bill. If Montana is going to be open to business to large data centers with staggering increased load projections, we must have real data to know what the needs will actually be if we're to strive to ensure affordable, reliable, sustainable energy to all Montanans. With proper planning, we may be able to avoid catastrophic outages that affected Texas and East Coast states in recent years. It is such a common sense bill that there were no opponents. And it's appropriate this data should be scrutinized through policymakers and regulators as this bill proposes. So for your consideration for future. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Commissioner Bukacek. Do you have more? Okay. For what it's worth, I believe we are to the point where we have a public commenter. Please.
Mr. President, hold on. Mr. President, we need to have her sit at the mic so
Yes.
people listening in the record can
Yes.
record.
My name is Lisa Bennett, Bennett. I'm from Carbon County, originally from Colorado. And I wanted to bring up an issue in Colorado who have had wind turbines for a lot longer than Montana, in my understanding of how long Montana has had them. Veronica Phelps is one of the original wind turbine landowners, and Nextera was the company that provided the wind turbines for her. She was looking for getting help in getting rid of 204 discarded turbine blades on her property. She had problems because Nextera, although they're the original owner and they're still in business, they contracted with a company called Rivercap Ventures, and that company went belly up. Then it got passed on to another company called Canvas. They also went out of business. Nextera doesn't want to have anything to do with it because they had passed it off to these other companies that are now no longer in business. This person has been trying for years to get rid of these wind turbine blades on her property that should be disposed of. It is now turning into a county and landowner issue because of the bankruptcy of these companies. You probably remember in the news, it was all over national news, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009 from Obama gave over $528 million to Solyndra, the solar company, who then went bankrupt a year later. The problem is that these green companies, these turbine and solar companies, without the government subsidies, which now Trump is saying, you know, he's freezing all loans, he's freezing everything. He's not going to allow like the wind turbines out in the ocean. They're not going to get that money. These companies are going bankrupt. If you guys don't consider upfront bonding, there's not going to be money from these companies to pay for it afterwards. That's the problem that these landowners have, real problems. And it's going to be a real problem in places like Iowa, where some of the first wind turbines went up. Decommissioning is a huge issue. And unless we know that we have the money up front from these companies, it's going to become a landowner and county issue. And it's usually going into what I'll call poorer, less financially stable counties is where these wind turbines are going in. These counties can't afford to do it. So who's going to get stuck with that bill is what you need to consider when these companies go belly up, which it appears from the way the Trump administration is approaching green energy, there's not going to be the federal subsidies that there have been for the last 20 some years. So just consider that in what you do with your decision making, that these companies are not stable without taxpayer money. And especially when the ones that are stable pass it off to third-party companies who clearly are not and go belly up very quickly. It's almost like they take the money up front because that's where the profit is to be made. And then the cost of disposal is so high, they offshore it to, I don't want to call them shell companies because I don't know how they're set up. So I don't want to claim that that's what they are, but companies that are not as stable as the originals, like the NextEras of the world. And they know that financially, they may not be around to take care of the disposal. And if we require federal land to have these bonds, why don't we require it on private land as well? Because that cost then gets borne on the landowner. You should pay attention to what's going on in Oklahoma. We've got legislation in Oklahoma looking to do a moratorium on all solar and wind projects there, because the research is out, which you guys should investigate, that there are PFAS, which are fluorinated type products in the coatings of the blades, in the solar panels themselves, that leach out and contaminate the soil, which means these farm areas are no longer going to be able to revert back to agriculture. The EPA actually considers PFAS a Superfund site chemical. It needs to be cleaned up to that level. These are things that you guys should educate yourselves on so that you are making the correct decisions. Someone, I think from Perry County, had said that the only green is the money. I agree with that. Green energy does have issues, and we're not looking at the long-term consequences of what's happening to our properties when we have these wind turbines and industrial solar installations done. And with wind turbines, you can look online. The coatings that they put on the blades are covered in PFASs, and whether it's due to icing, erosion, wind, those particles break off. And we're talking chunks, but usually little at a time, and the wind carries that for miles. So it will devastate the properties that don't have wind turbines on them either. And I'm concerned, especially in the Great Falls area, you've got a lot of the Hootie Amish that have wind turbines up on their property, and they're growing our wheat. And why is this a concern? Because in Oklahoma, hay that was tested underneath wind turbines by the state lab, it was tested to see what the protein content was. And instead, the state lab said, you need to destroy that crop. It is covered in plastics and it is unfit for consumption and dangerous to the water aquifers as well. Well, where did that plastic come from? Well, he planted underneath the wind turbines on his property. That's where he put the hay. We need to consider the whole implications of this green energy plan. And so I'm just asking you to do your own independent research and look into it. But I don't think this is what we should be covering Montana in, and especially without bonding. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa Bennett. I'm not seeing any other public commenters online or in public. So we'll move on to announcements unless somebody has a comment or question. The announcement would be for upcoming meetings or special PSC events the public should be knowledgeable about. On Thursday at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we will have an out-of-cycle work session to pick the time and to announce the time and location for a public listening session located in Big Timber due to the amount of complaints we're receiving there on Class D pickup, so that we might move forward from there. I will be in contact with the county commissioners and the city in hopes of finding an area, a room with enough bandwidth to actually be able to broadcast live from there. So, seeing no further business to come before the commission at this time. What?
Mr. President?
Yes.
We might want to note that the meeting time for next week's scheduling and business meeting as well is 10:30 and 11 a.m.
Right. What we will be doing is, and at 1 o'clock this afternoon, we'll have a wildfire and resilience meeting. People are coming in from far away as France on this. Everybody that's a player in wildlife or in wildfire behavioral management has been invited, including the congressional delegations. That should run from 1 till about 4:30. And in the future, our regular starting time for legislative work sessions, unless announced differently, will stay as it was today, which will be 10:30 for the scheduling and 11 o'clock for the meeting. So that particularly in the wintertime when the roads are bad, public that wishes to come here, if they're facing bad roads, will have a little more time without having to get a motel room. And commissioners won't have to come early and get a motel room and bear that expense to be here earlier in the day. So, seeing no further business, unless I've dropped another one, to come before the commission. For the record, the time is 12:16 and the date is January 28th in the month of January, the year of 2025. This meeting is hereby adjourned.